Okay, looks like we are alive. Just expand the video. Yes, I am alive. Yes, indeed, live from the Healing Masculinity group. Just gonna wait for some brothers to join here. It's a lovely day here in Costa Rica. We've got some beautiful fog rolling in. It is rainy season, time to go inward. And it's a beautiful moon day. And today, of course, Mercury went direct, so I'm very excited about that. So I see some brothers are trickling in. So welcome everyone. My name is Darren Austin Hall, and I am so excited to be with you here today. My heart is filled with energy right now. I am very excited to kick things off with you on this 5-day course this week. And I have a new microphone, so let me know if I'm coming in loud and clear in the comments. And please use the comments as much as you like to share things, ideas, questions, although please hold your questions, the burning questions, for the end of the week, because on Friday we're going to have a beautiful Q&A. So just to take you through a quick intro on what we're going to be doing in the next 5 days, I've laid out this beautiful map of these 4 realms that we're going to be going through on this quest for authentic manhood. And I've chosen these really cool archetypal themes in all the years that I've been working with men in the men's movement. Archetypes have been one of the great tools that I've used. Great, everything's good. And so I gleaned these 4 themes for us to move through. So today we're going to be talking about the lost man. We're going to be looking at the terrain of more of the woundedness that men face in the 21st century. And from there we'll move on the second day, on Tuesday, tomorrow, into the wild man, which is an especially potent subject and one that I've taught in the past, and one that really gets me excited. And then on Wednesday, we're going to be looking at the mother's man, which is some really interesting and sensitive terrain, because we're going to be looking at our relationships to our mothers, but we're also going to be looking at how we can constellate a relationship to the divine feminine and really honor a re-rendering of the goddess in our life, not just God if we have a spiritual path. And then on Thursday, we're going to finish our journey with the glorious man, which is going to be looking at kind of the boon of doing this men's work. What are the qualities of excellence that we want to embody as men, and looking at all the realms that we've traveled. We're going to be looking at the pinnacle of transformation at that point. And I've given you a handout, which you can find on the group as well. Hopefully some of you have printed it out, because I'm going to take some moments to ask you to write answers to some of the questions, to just cue a deeper embodiment of the material I'll be presenting. And of course, you can also comment in the comments with some answers as well. But it's going to be really, really exciting. And then of course, on the Friday, we'll have a question and answer where I'll be answering any of your burning questions. And we'll also end off with a really cool authentic masculinity activation, which will be really exciting. And yeah, I'm really excited for this work. So yeah, before we begin, I'd love to hear, where are people coming from? If you just want to type in the comments. I see Daniel Anner. Oh yes, Daniel, brother Daniel's coming in from Mexico. I know Trevor, you're back in Canada. That's so great. It's great to see some brothers who I know as dear friends in this group. Super exciting. As you know, I'm coming here from Costa Rica. As I was sharing at the beginning, we're in the heart of rainy season, which is actually a beautiful time of year. Good old Kitchener, Canmore, Alberta, nice. And it's a beautiful time to go inward and do soul work. California, beautiful. St. Mary's, it's so beautiful to see all you brothers here. Amazing. Okay, a lot of Canadian content, which is great. I just spent some beautiful time. Oh man, Chris Dubb, wicked. spent some great time in Canada for 2 months. It had been a while since I'd done that. All right, great brothers. So before we get into the material, let's just take a moment to just center ourselves in a meditative moment here. So I encourage you, wherever you're sitting, to just take a nice tall seat. Just find a nice straightness in the spine, but don't let the spine be rigid or filled with any kind of tension. If you want, you can just take an inhale, reach up with the spine, and on the exhale, just let the spine find a nice organic straightness. And I encourage you now to just take your hands and place them with the palms down on your knees or your legs. This is nice and grounding. And just take a moment here to close your eyes. And I encourage you to just start finding presence of breath. Start to bring your awareness into your breathing process. And let's just let out a few sighs in this moment. Just audible sighs. Really let it out. Any tension that you've been holding throughout the morning, throughout the day, just anything you've been holding on in Mercury retrograde, it's gone direct today, just release it out in some nice exhaling sighs. And then just allow your breath to come deep down into your core, into your belly. Really rooting it just below the navel to this beautiful center in Chinese medicine called the Dantian, which is the geographic center of our body. And it's also the place of vitality in the body, where vitality is really pumped through the meridian system, the chi, the prana, the energy. So breathing nice and deep into this space, and just start to become aware of your body. And just see if you can just relax yourself into this moment. And just let your mind and your body find that beautiful merge. And in this moment, I'd just like to call in this divine force of the masculine. This solar energy, the yang energy, the radiant energy of our universe. Of course, we're a coupling of masculine and feminine, but this week we're going to be really looking at the masculine force. So I'd like you to just honor this masculine force inside of your body. It doesn't have to be specific. Just send a vibration of honoring inside of you. And really honor this masculine force inside of you. Honor your manhood. And let us also pay reverence to the line of our fathers, all the generations of men that have come before us. You can imagine them right now standing behind you one by one, maybe lining in the hundreds or if not the thousands. Really calling them into this moment to send us their wisdom, especially on the matter of masculinity, on what it means to be a man in this new era and this shift of ages. Breathing in all of that support from the ancestors. And feeling that in your heart space. And taking one hand over the other on your heart. And just imagining that your heart is shining bright with the beautiful light of your masculine force. And take a moment to just give yourself some thanks for being here, whether you're on the live with us right now or later on the replay. Just honoring your own heart, perhaps feeling your heartbeat, feeling that life inside of you, and bringing a sense of reverence to your existence. Let's just let out one activating Om. And I invite you to make this an Om that's filled with this energy of honor to spread throughout all the cells of your being. So let's breathe in. And sigh out first. Breathing into Om. Taking a moment just to rest in your heart, feeling that vibration shimmering throughout the ocean of your being. And then you can open your eyes, taking your hands away, coming back to the space. All right, welcome again, brothers. So let us start by talking about the idea of a quest. The reason why I called this 5-day series a quest for authentic manhood is because as a child, I was really drawn to quests, the idea of the knights of the Round Table. I was obsessed with King Arthur. And as I grew older and became an ardent student of ancient wisdom, I started to realize that the whole Arthurian romance and the idea of the chivalric knights was actually a very relevant part of our development. And not just in Europe and Britannia, but there's a lot of theories that a lot of the chivalric traditions came actually from Persia, from elements of Sufism as well. And the idea of the quest was a chance for men to go out into the world and to prove their virtues. And virtues are really defined, I think, best by the Taoists of the Orient. They call the virtues the marvelous impulses, those great, good impulses of excellence that we have. Things like courage, things like fidelity, things like discipline, things like kindness. So they would set upon these quests, and the quest would give them an opportunity to challenge their mettle, to really extend themselves beyond the limits of their former power, so they could really flex their, not only their physical muscles, but their psychological muscles as well, the muscles of their mind. And the quests were also done largely to show themselves, show their virtue to the lady with a capital L, which was seen as like the goddess or the divine feminine, but also maybe the women in their life, to win their favor. There was this idea that men had to earn the love of a woman, but we can also see this in a way as earning the love of the feminine. And this is in no way to set up any kind of inequality between masculine and feminine principles, but to maybe just shed light on a natural kind of disposition between them. And I'm sure you've seen this in your own life, especially if you're heterosexual. There's this kind of thing that happens when men show their virtue to women. Women get turned on by it. True women who are really authentic, they really find themselves attracted to men of virtue. So there is something just deeply encoded, I think, in our natural beingness for men to sort of earn the love of women. And there's a lot more to say on that, but we're going to dive into other topics today. But I just wanted to set the intro up of why I called this the quest. The other thing that's beautiful about the quest is, although the quest can have a goal in mind, like the search for the Holy Grail, largely quests are about not necessarily the goal as being the destination. The quest itself is the destination. To go on a quest, to enter into a stream of transformation itself is the boon, is the reward. And so this week, my intention is to take us through these 4 different realms as a kind of quest. And along the way, we're going to cover some very challenging material that I think is going to provoke a lot of different contemplations in you, may even just give your life a good shake, especially when we think about our relationships to our mother, for example. And that's good, because we need challenges. Something that I've learned a lot just by coming into a better relationship with my own masculinity and my manhood is that men really crave challenges. And that can be the same for women who are really activated in their masculinity as well. There's something that the masculine just enjoys about rising to the occasion. Sexual entendre, I guess, intended in that sense. So quests give us a chance to really exude ourselves, to be challenged. And through those challenges, as we find when we go to a gym and lift weight, muscles grow bigger when they have something heavier to lift. And when we start to activate, this is a bit into the warrior archetype, when we start to activate this kind of desire to be challenged, this zest, this gusto in us, that rather than shirks from adversity, but rather sees adversity as a sweet thing to sort of embrace, this can become one of the biggest shifts that can happen in a man's life, because you start to realize that there's like inbuilt resources within yourself, this kind of resilience, this relentlessness, that is just not being activated by the world. And this is where we get into the lostness of what we've lost in our modern culture. But before we get into that, I have 2 questions here in your handout, just like some cues to get us started. You can write these down, but if you want to just share them in the comments as well. The first question is, what are the qualities of a virtuous man? So if you want to jot those down right now or fire some in to the comments. I thought we'd start here because this will be a nice reflection point for us to get to on the last day, on Friday, and to see maybe how some of these answers have changed as we've gone through the work on our quest. And remember, virtue is very synonymous with just good or positive qualities. So if you just want to contemplate that in this moment, don't think about it too much. Let there kind of just be a spontaneous flow. Sean writes integrity. Oh, yeah, what a powerful word that is indeed. Honesty, indeed. Honesty is being, seen by a few men there. Pramadasa and Edgar. Claude, beautiful, loving, compassionate, sensitive, generous, open, steward of this planet, brothers and sisters. Aho. Loyal and truthful, writes Tony. Keeps his word, consistency. Wow, there's so many things coming in. I love it. Accountability, says Kevin. Compassion for self, Gord, very key. And Stuart writes principled, steadfast, and consistent, loving, gentle, and caring with healthy boundaries. Beautiful. Emmett, honesty, openness, consideration, and a sense of responsibility. Yes. Compassion, says Vladdy. Self-forgiveness, says Jose. I love that. Awareness, Sean. Trevor, safe, trustworthy, generator, provider, empathy, dependable, creator. Maury says courage. Claude says kind and love, forgiving. Amazing. Wow, I'm blown away, guys. That is just littered with great stuff. Clearly, a lot of men here have been doing some self-developmental work. These are beautiful words. Great to see you, Gary. Strength and compassion, honesty and fairness. That's wonderful. So let's dovetail into the second question because they're also related. What qualities do you wish to grow in yourself, in your life right now? Taking in mind all the virtues that we've just poured out so beautifully. What are some of the qualities that you yourself right now are growing in the psychic garden of your soul, in the fertile lands of your life? What are the things that you're really trying to focus on right now? I know for me, something that's coming up is order, is just finding structure, which is something that really connects to the king archetype. Especially since I've been back in Costa Rica, and maybe I can blame a little on the Mercury retrograde, but I found my life has been a bit disorganized and I've been a little overwhelmed. Okay, so Pramadasa, tolerance, acceptance, forgiveness. Albert, emotional availability, big time. I think most men are working on that because we've just not been trained to be emotionally intelligent, which is something we'll get into a bit today. Music theory. Excellent, Edgar. You know, from my sound healing realm, studying music is a great discipline for the soul. Integrity and being a man of my word. Yes, thank you, Dwayne. Acceptance and release of that which I am experiencing. Great, Gord. Andrew, Alexander, Amaral. Great, brother. Yes. Oh, wow, so many great comments. Michael says emotional harmony. Authentic relationship with my woman. Yes, Pascal. I mean, so much of the men's work I find, especially for those who are in relationships with women, it does really play a role in that. Surrendering to the flow of life. Yes. JS space holding, vulnerability and listening. Yes. Make a difference with my work. Great, Unair. That's very valiant. Trust in self and conviction. Yes, Gary, that's a great one. Okay. Great, brothers. Excellent. So let us get into things right now. Let's put some gristle in our mouth to chew on, and we're going to look into this theme of the lost man now. So as you see in the handout, I began with this beautiful and poignant quote by Robert Bly. The wounded man knows something, or is something. And if you're familiar with Robert Bly's work, with his book, Iron John, it's incredible what this man has offered to the men's movement. But, and what's great about Robert Bly's writing actually is he's very good at rendering and illuminating the wounded space that a lot of men embody in their lives. And I wanted to start with this today because, to borrow a bit from the warrior archetype, whenever we set upon any work or any quest, it's good to take stock in a sober way of what's before us so we can have the correct strategy, so we're not puffed up with too much idealism. And I thought this would be a great way to start, to just get a sense of some of the greatest wounds that maybe we carry as men, so that we can have a really clear sense of the direction we want to make, not just in this week, but maybe in our life, if these ideas really are poignant to you. So this idea of lostness, I would put out a theory to most of you that I think a lot of men carry this kind of sense, this haunting sense that there's something missing in their life, this kind of lostness that haunts them very deeply. And I know this was very true for me. In fact, this lostness was something that was covered up in my life, and I wasn't even aware of it until I started doing men's work. And this is about over a decade ago now. If you've done men's work with me, I love telling the story of how I was in India and I met this beautiful brother from Portugal, Duarte, and he introduced me to the archetypal men's work. And at that point, I'd never, ever considered working on my masculinity. As a man, I thought it was my duty to do a lot more work on my feminine side. And so my masculine side was never really something that I connected to. And it wasn't something that I was even so aware of. So when I started to do the men's work and started to look at the terrain of the archetypes, where we do a lot of work in the shadow, which is really, really connecting and relating to our woundedness, this sense of lostness became very, very, very clear to me. And, it can sound a bit abstract, so I'm going to get very concrete. This sense of lostness really has to do with the loss of rites of initiations, the cultivation of manhood, that if you study a lot of traditional societies and cultures, you realize that they had a great sense of what it takes to cultivate an excellent human being. In fact, a lot of ancient indigenous traditional cultures were highly brilliant in realms of psychology. Just look at Buddhism, for example. Buddhism is just filled, replete with teachings about what is the mind, what is consciousness, how to really work with this great tool that we have called the mind. And we're not really educated in any way how to use our mind properly in our conventional education system. We're just sort of taught all this parroting information that we have to regurgitate. It's really not until later on life that we do our own education that men and women tend to go into self-development work and start looking at their interior terrain. But in traditional societies, they really were brilliant at mapping this out. And they really understood that there are stages of development in every man and woman's life. And that one of the biggest leaps that we have to make is moving from the beautiful bastion of beauty and innocence and playfulness that is our childhood into adulthood that usually happens through the bridge of our adolescence and our teenage years. And so in these traditional cultures, they recognize that as you enter into adolescence, you go through these massive growth spurts, especially as men. Your voice drops, you become libidinous in the sense that you have a sexual energy all of a sudden that you have to deal with, and the sexual force, and dealing with that is such a huge challenge and something that we do so poorly at in contemporary society. And then the idea is that we're going to be stewarded into a force of integrity where we are then going to be able to be responsible. Responsibility is probably one of the biggest and primary characteristics of transformation that these rites of initiation really pinpoint on, because we are supposed to be all of a sudden the responsible adults that will take care of the village, of the culture, the place that we live in, the community that we live with, and the society and the social order. And one of the great tragedies of contemporary culture is through colonization, and pretty much we've all been colonized. At some point, if you look at our generational lines going all the way back, we were all indigenous people at some point. We all had these traditional rites, and through colonization, all of this was severed, just cut, and often very brutally so. And we lost touch with these ancient cultural ideas, these ancient ideas of how to properly steward beings through these stages of development, such as even looking later in life and stewarding people into the realm of elderhood. These are things that we don't do really at all in our culture. Through industrialization, humans became more tools of industry, and it wasn't so much about developing the interior world. It was more about developing us to be tools of money making and such, and sort of feudal serfs of the state. So this was a big loss. And to really get into the nitty gritty of what these initiation ceremonies are about, and I've been studying them for years, and I'll say right off the bat, I don't consider myself an initiated man. So this is a very difficult topic to talk about. And I've done a lot of work over the years with another beautiful mentor and leader in the men's movement world, and just in the great human philosophical movement. His name is Stephen Jenkinson. And I remember I was up at Stephen's land, and he gave this very poignant talk about the rites of initiation and what a big loss that is. And they were trying to resurrect these initiations, and they said it was so difficult because we're trying to resurrect something that we necessarily haven't experienced. Now, I will say I did have the incredibly blessed opportunity to do a rites of passage, actually, with an Anishinaabe elder called Dave Christian, leading Earthman in Manitoba. So in some ways I have tasted it, and that 3-day vision quest was truly one of the great life-changing moments. But it happened much later in life than it was usually supposed to be. It's supposed to be happening around the time that you're really entering into adolescence, around 10, 11, 12 years old. So from what I've been studying and learning about in these initiation ceremonies, the idea was to take the boy through a death to rebirth cycle. They would be taken through this kind of ritual experience with the men of the village and some ritual elders who really understood how to hold these very powerful activating spaces of transformation, so that they could, in a sense, kill the childhood, destroy and dismantle in a graceful and transformational and powerful way this childhood identity, so that it could be reconfigured and reintegrated into this new identity of the boy becoming a man. And some of these initiation ceremonies are very intense, and they're often filled with a sense of intensity to sort of push you into a change, a real demarcation. In fact, some initiation ceremonies entail giving you a ritual scar, burning something in your arm to remind you of this moment, and also to remind you that you are always a walking wounded person. We always have our imperfections that we have to work on to keep us kind of humble. And another example of these initiations that's very important, which kind of dovetails with the third realm, the mother's man, is it was very important to make a clean cut from the mother, because a lot of men, all of us, when we come out of the womb, we rely on the mother, we rely on the nourishment of the breast. And there's a codependency there that's necessary, but after a certain amount of time it has to be broken. So in some cultures, I know in Africa, the men will actually storm into the house in the middle of the night wearing archetypal masks, very scary. And they will actually seize the boy and take him from the house. And the mother actually knows what's going on, but she'll feign a kind of terror to make it more of a psychodrama, to like up the ante of the emotions, because emotions can really power up the intensity of an experience. And then they take the boy, they wrestle him out of his mother's arms even, and they take him deep into the wild. And he will remain there for a number of days. And the men will basically start to teach him perhaps new sacred stories, the new mythologies, the guiding narratives that everyone in the village or the culture is taught, to sort of start to create a new sense of themselves and where they fit into the grand scheme of things. And the grand scheme of things is very important, because when we're children, we are sort of the center of our parents' universe. There's a kind of healthy self-centeredness there, because of course, when we come out of our mother's womb, we are helpless. We can't feed ourselves. We need absolute 100% care all the time. So we are kind of the center of our parents' universe. They have to take care of us and fulfill all of our needs. And but as we get into adolescence and we become more self-reliant, bigger, stronger, smarter, wiser, we don't necessarily need that anymore. And they really realize that there needs to be a clean break that happens. And we also need to realize that we're no longer the center of this universe. There's a kind of egoic inflation and narcissism that can really start to be brewed up when we're children. I know this is something that I had to face when I started to really lean into my own narcissistic tendencies. I was quite bratty as a child. I really held on to wanting to be the center of the universe for a very long time, as my mother and my father would probably tell you with rolling eyes. But there was no kind of initiation that I went through that diminished my ego. And a lot of us carry this, what they call in archetypal theory, the armchair tyrant, sitting in this high chair, throwing food around, demanding all these things. Some of us never grow out of that. So it's really, really interesting to acknowledge that this is a very important thing that has to happen, where we're sort of taken away from the center of the universe, and then we're placed around a new transpersonal purpose. So what is that transpersonal purpose? Well, it would be kind of the great Dharma, the great Mat, as the Egyptians would call it, the sacred laws that everyone follows in the village, the great mythology, the great higher purpose, the stewarding of heaven and earth, these huge, great philosophical themes that galvanize all of the citizens together in a united sense of meaning and purpose, this transpersonal purpose. And you then become a utility in service to this purpose. And that can be incredibly inspiring to have that very dignified and inspiring purpose that can fuel you for the rest of your life. I know a lot of us love these movies that are really drenched in archetypes, these heroic films like Lord of the Rings, because these are sagas where we're watching these characters being transformed by having this higher mission in life, this higher purpose that forces them into situations where these abilities that may have lied dormant have to really be exuded. They have to be tested. They have to be embodied and often evolved and mastered and refined so that we can fulfill this higher goal. And one of the things that we've lost in the loss of initiations is we've also lost this sense of the transpersonal purpose of the great mythologies and the guiding narratives. I mean, if we look at most of where we've probably grown up in some vestige, some modification of Western culture, what is the great goal? When I think back on what I was educated on in my public school system, it was like, well, to make a lot of money, to get a cottage, to retire, to believe in these kind of vague terms like democracy, which were never really properly defined. And it was very uninspiring. And this is usually why when people enter into their teenage years, especially boys, where you have all this masculine, yang, testosterone energy that's looking for like a place to really be put on tracks, to really be serving something, and it has nowhere to go, it starts to get very chaotic. And often we because we've been in initiation ceremonies for millions or thousands of years, we're craving this. So this is why a lot of teenagers will seek like extreme experiences with drugs and alcohol and other daredevil kinds of things. We're looking for a way to like test all this energy that's being enthused in us, and there's no ritual elders around to really help us do that. So it often gets really messy, and it can get really dangerous even. So this is a big loss. And this is something that we need to contemplate, because this should get to a point when you really, really deeply reflect on it, that it kind of breaks something in your heart, or you realize your heart's already been broken this whole time. When I look back on my life and the amount of self-destructive behaviors that I started to absorb into my life and embody in my life, especially through my teenage years when I started to smoke cigarettes and not eat well and abuse drugs and pornography. A lot of this was because I didn't have anyone to teach me how to use these forces in my life. And we have to realize as well, and this is an important point, because a lot of our patterns of self-destructiveness, addictions and such, it's because we haven't been properly educated how to use our being and how to deal with adversities in our life. And this feeling of lostness that really haunts the hearts of men, this longing for other men, other motherly men. Robert Bly says, initiation ceremonies are actually about men mothering boys into man. We're really craving that. And that's why when I started to get into my late 20s and I finally found these elder men, especially in the First Nations, blessed First Nations peoples of Canada, who welcomed us into their circles, when I saw these beautiful men who had gone through these stages of initiations and they were towers of integrity and virtue. I just wanted to be around them all the time. I just wanted to soak it up, you know, what this juiciness that they had, this real masculinity, this warriorness. I remember seeing a video way long ago in my, not way long ago, but in my mid-20s when there was a protest, I think about pipelines happening in Canada, and they had like some politician, you know, some white politician come forward and talk about industry and how we needed this oil pipeline. And then they had like this traditional indigenous chief come, this bear of a man, and the way he spoke, he was very calm and peaceful, but there was a power to him, and you could just see the juxtaposition of manhood between these two men. And of course, the politician had this kind of very, there was no gusto, there was this kind of deficit of masculinity, and then you had this like indigenous man who was just brimming with this really valorous, virtuous power of manhood that was very inspiring. So this is kind of something we're carrying around, a lot of tears, and this is what's interesting about the men's work to me is, and one of the action steps I'll get into, we're going to be looking at, your homework is to look into grief work, is that there is a huge well of tears in the hearts of almost every man, and a lot of it has to do with what we've lost. And when I do men's work, especially when we look at the warrior archetype, which is usually where I start a lot of my courses and programs, just the amount of men who've been sent off to war to destroy other men, women, children, and go through the trauma of war. There is so much sadness there, and that's in all of our lines, because we've all had men in our lines who have fought and absorbed the horrors of war. So this grief work is very important. And then on top of that, men are still, we're like just at the leading edge of men starting to be really in touch with their feminine, to really be in touch with their emotions. This is like very new. If you just look at like our fathers and what they had to come through, that kind of machismo, that like never, boys don't cry, you know, holding this kind of stolid sense of emotional all-togetherness, even in the face of like everything inside being absolutely chaotic. That's huge. I mean, when those emotions don't come out, they go inside and they're just cutting you up. They're just ripping everything to shreds. And I remember telling a sister years back, and I actually wrote an partnerships with men are, when they try and have like a vulnerable conversation about emotions and stuff, and men just put up these walls, you know, and women can get really angry. And I said something that kind of blew both of our minds, because it was a spontaneous insight that came to me in that moment, but I know it really unlocked something for her. And I said, you know, when he shuts down emotionally and he has like no emotional expression, just know that inside of him there's a little boy that's like crying his eyes out because he has no idea how to do this. He has no idea how to share emotions. He actually thinks that the sharing of emotions is emasculating, is going to be a diminishment of everything that is good and beautiful about his manhood. And that's a huge distortion that we have. And so this lostness, it's also about like, we have to mine it. We have to mine it out. And that's why it's really important, not only for men, but for women nowadays, with all of the social mediation that's happening. We're being pulled into technology here, there. We're losing a sense of a contemplative life. We need to really have time every day to examine our life, to really allow the mind also come into homeostasis, also come into rebalancing. And, you know, I love this expression in shamanism. They say we have to stalk something, which means to hunt something, not in the like negative connotation that we have in the West, but we have to like stalk these wounds. We have to stalk our lostness. We have to go and find where it is, because when we start to get in touch with that, that grief is going to be very motivating to then become finders, because we want to be finders. We want to find what we've lost. And the other thing that we've lost through this is a connection, as I've been alluding to men. We've lost a connection to our fathers. A lot of our fathers, because of industry, has besieged the nuclear family with all this work, bills, financial system, always like so much more work, so that fathers have now been ripped out of the home. You know, they're overworking. Most of us grew up with absentee fathers. And then, of course, the two world wars just like smashed a lot of men with so much trauma and closed them down. So a lot of us have grown up, even if we had fathers living with us in our homes and there was never a divorce, our fathers were probably distant. And that is not to fault them in any way. In fact, that should cause us to have deep compassion, because these wounds are not personal. These are impersonal wounds. This is a very important point that I want you all to know, is that this lostness that I'm speaking about is this lostness is not something that you need to carry yourself. This is something that we need to carry together as men. This is why men's groups are so important, to come together and start to hold these wounds together so that we can start to acknowledge how we're all feeling these wounds together. So this is not always just on our shoulders, which is so important, because a lot of men, again, the machismo, the old kind of masculine conditioning was like, do it all by yourself. In fact, I want to correct myself, because I put this quote at the beginning of the handout by Plato, and I was reading it over today, and I realized, you know what? This quote doesn't really speak for me. It says, the man who makes everything that leads to happiness depends upon himself and not upon other men, has adopted the very best plan for living happily. And I don't really agree with that. I think there's a half-truth there. Self-reliance is very cool. And I think most men do well having some alone time, like going out into the woods, some really purposeful alone time, like hermiting. But we need now a brotherhood, because we're starting to get really good at stalking these wounds, and we're realizing how systemic they are, how generational they are. And this is going to be a teamwork thing. We can't just do this alone. This is really, really big stuff, and it's going to take a lot of us to carry it. Many hands make light work, right? So this is very, very powerful stuff. And it can, in the end, cause us to have a lot of compassion for our fathers, and start to repair that wound that we have often with our fathers, because our fathers have maybe never been close to us. We've never had a kind of conscious masculine relationship with our fathers where we've talked about our feelings. And I know there was something very sweet that happened in my life before my father passed away. As I started to do this work, briefly before he transitioned, I started to have these beautiful, long conversations with my father, where I would ask about his life and the challenges he went through. And I wish I had done it sooner, because he had so much to share. And it's almost like he was waiting for me to ask those questions. He didn't know how to really talk about it himself. He probably didn't think I was interested in it, because in his masculine conditioning, it's like, well, why would my son care about my feelings, or, you know, some of the vulnerable experiences that I've had? And it was one of the most healing things. It actually rectified our relationship, because throughout my teenage years, my father and I were really like disconnected. You know, he was very gruff and temperamental, and he had a temper and all these things. And I'm sure a lot of you can relate to that. But in my 20s, as I started to go into self-development work and gained a lot more sensitivity, we had this beautiful kind of healing that happened in our relationship, which was super, super beautiful. So it's really important that we hone in on this lostness, because we have something to find. And something that Carl Jung really pinpointed on, because he talked a lot about initiation ceremonies as well, is that even though we've lost these rites of transformation, life itself is an initiation. So we don't have to feel that all is lost. Life itself is always putting you on a course of adversity. It's always challenging you. The deal is, how can we create the mindset that these challenges are something that are opportunities for us to grow. That's why probably my favorite quote that I put in the blurb here for this live is from Shakespeare, which is, "Sweet are the uses of adversity." And as I spoke at the beginning, when we start to really get in touch with our masculine energy, and tomorrow we're going to be talking a bit about the libido too, which is not just a sexual thing. It's kind of this like vital force of liveliness, you know, that is at the root of our being, which has been very suppressed by contemporary culture. When we start to bring online that masculine gusto and realize you don't have to be afraid of exuding it, you know, I think a lot of men are afraid to exude their power because We've been told there's so much that's toxic about men, but I think that net is way too big. Yeah, there's toxic elements, but there's elements that of the masculine that are brash and bold, and for good fucking reason, because they're beautiful and they need to be big and they need to boom with that warrior energy. And we really learn how to bring that fire online, which is something that in me had almost gone out completely, because again, contemporary culture is not really activating that. You start to all of a sudden find this beautiful warrior energy that all of a sudden the challenges in your life are exciting, you know? Have you ever had that feeling that you're like completely overwhelmed and you're feeling all this anxiety and depression because of all these challenges in your life? And then you listen to like a really good rock song or some movie or something, and all of a sudden you just feel like nothing can stop you and you can conquer everything. Well, that's that kind of masculine force, and we want to create a consistency in that force. So that's what we're going to be looking at as this week goes on as well. So I'm going to move to some of these reflective questions now, because I think I've talked an awful lot, but it's great to see some of the comments. I know there's been a bit of a signal issue. Hopefully it's correcting itself. I apologize. In Costa Rica sometimes we go through that. It's not yet a total first world country. But if you want to look at your handout, or I'm going to speak these questions to you, and you can write them down. And I encourage you, if you want to write a bit even in the comments, that would be great as well. So this first reflection question is a bit philosophical, something to chew on. It is, have you ever felt this mysterious, deep, even existential feeling of loss or lostness? And if you have, I'd like you to describe it. So think about that for a moment, all the things that I've been talking about. And for some of us, it may be like, I've never felt this lostness. So this is the first time I've heard anyone talk about initiation ceremonies or lostness. But, as I said, when we sit with this stuff more and more, we start to find that there's like this fragmented part of our manhood that hasn't been properly brought online. So just take a moment to reflect on that. You can write it down on your handout. Claude says, looking for love in so many low places. Oof. Michael asks, would lostness be the same as separation from source? Absolutely. I mean, it's open to interpretation. I mean, I'm also trying to just get that online too, for you to just, what does lostness mean to you? It might mean, I don't feel connected to source in any way. It's a bit of a thought-provoking question. I want you to think a little about it, get a little deep into yourself. Nico is reflecting about having a beautiful, strong father and older brother. Initiated into our manhood as the strongest construction labor force. Yeah, brother, for sure. That can be an initiation ceremony in itself. Pramadasa says, it's the vulnerability of the heart, especially when a romantic connection comes to a close. It's a lot of armor to remove to allow the love in, only to have it hurt and bruised. Oof. Wow, yeah, I can totally resonate with that. That hits deep. Claude says, desecrated my body and mind with drugs and other addictions. Yeah, aho. Brother speaks for me for sure. Michael says, I used to feel this deep, profound emptiness in my mid-20s. I attributed it to loneliness, a longing for a partner, but I discovered that it may be more of a feeling of separation from the divine. This couldn't be attributed to anything specific. Indeed. Gary, pretty much my whole life I felt something is missing, a big void. For years I filled it with drugs and alcohol. Yeah. I think most men can relate, because we've not been taught how to be emotionally intelligent in some way. Stuart says, for me, it's not feeling complete, almost like being half empty. It could even be described as not having a deeper purpose or having that purpose removed. Yeah, big time. Purpose is so important in our lives. And I would even go on a limb to say it's even more important in a man's life than a woman's life. And that's, again, no hierarchy or comparison in any kind of way of who's better or worse. But men tend to be a lot more driven by purpose. Although in this day and age where the masculine and the feminine is being braided a lot more as people do spiritual work and get in touch with the soul that is more amorphous, women are really starting to master the masculinity as well. Gord says, I lost who I was because of trauma and subsequent mental health issues. Totally. Wow, I feel that. And, you know, we're not a trauma-informed society, and there's so much trauma. It's such a big problem. Tony says, my feeling of existential loss definitely correlates to the ideas put forward by society that you touched on. There were material goals that did not have an emotional, spiritual side of our human attached to them. The emptiness was filled with drugs, alcohol, and unconscious sexual relationships without real connection. Brother speaks for me, yeah. I feel and resonate with all that. Albert says, I think reading feminist literature was depressing because men are often and naturally the villains. While I agreed with much of it, it was hard to be the monsters. Yeah, I mean, that's a whole interesting conversation in itself. The pain body of women is so intense, and as I said, you know, sometimes the toxic masculinity label, the net can be too big. I haven't experienced immediate family loss yet, says Edgar. I do contemplate my father's health and age, though. It has brought me to tears in the past. But I now understand we're all in this together and no one left behind in life and death. Beautiful. Beautiful. You know, helping my father transition in death was one of the most beautiful experiences of my life. And I really hope that when your parents do go through that process, you can be there for them. And after, I did a lot of prayers and connected with him spiritually. It was really, really profound. Well, thank you, brothers. Let's move on to the final question. What aspects of your life feel like something is missing? Something is missing. Again, you can write it down in the handout, or if you want to just comment away. I'm loving this. This is great. So many great comments. Paul says to the last question, it's the partner to connect. It's the partner to connected moments to beauty, love, nature connection that shows what has been missing and the grief for the creative beauty we could be living and haven't been. Wow. Absolutely. That's why I moved to Costa Rica, and I'm sure you, Paul, and others have moved outside of Sydney. You've been there the whole time. Nature is such a mirror and a reflector in so many ways. Jose says, feels expensive to be human. High price to pay for living in energy, money, emotion. Feels fairless too often. Indeed. So I'm guessing, Pascal, you're answering the last question. Purpose. Hopefully by this week's end, even by the end of today, you may start to feel a bit more purpose. Self-compassion, says Gord. Yeah, it seems like endlessly compassion is mastered. It's something that I know I have to constantly work on. Yes, the question, Gary, was what aspects of your life feel like something is missing? What aspects of your life feel like something is missing? And there is a handout, and after this live is over, you can go back in the group and you'll find it. It is posted there. You can download the PDF. And these questions are there. Pramadasa says, a sense of accomplishment of duty, spirit, and honor. Yeah, I like that idea of duty. You know, it can be a word that a lot of us shy away from, I think, because the toxic realm of masculinity has been attached to these kind of bad duties, like going to war, these unjust wars and stuff. But when it's the right duty, it can be so powerful. Freedom in all areas of my life, Michael says. Bold, love it, man. Magical says, I've neglected nourishing my soul with leisure, play, and adventure. Ah, yes, play. Men need to play much more often. Malcolm says, all the people around me are women. I have a lot of them relying on me. Speaking up now is really hard, and I'm forcing myself to do it in some way. Yeah, Malcolm, well, I would say, you know, I'm glad to have you here with these brothers, even just virtually, but seeking out other men, you know, men's groups is so vital for a man's life. Okay. These are really great, brothers. Really great. Well, thank you for answering all these questions, and I'll keep reading them as they come, but I'm gonna have to wrap up very soon. So I wanted to move on to the action steps. So these are little homework items that you can take into your life. We're going to be meeting again tomorrow, so they're pretty simple, but I think very powerful. And I'll be posting these again in the group for people to look at, and you can even write some comments later today or tomorrow after you've done the work, and we'll create a bit more of a beautiful conversation around this. So the first action step, and you'll again find this in the handout, is to make a list of all of your wounds or imperfections. And then right beneath them or across from them, if you're going to make like a chart with 2 columns, which can be really effective, write ways that you could improve on each of them. So write your wounds or your imperfections and then ways that you could improve or heal them. And this is a beautiful exercise that I got from some esoteric spiritual practices that I used to do in Gnosticism. Because right away when we start to see what the wound is and then write kind of the solution, we're already starting the wheel flowing in that other direction from karma to dharma. We're getting into that constructionism, not the destructionism of things. So this is already going to be an exercise that's going to energetically start to get you looking towards that pathway of a new mission. And it can be a very, very powerful way to just like take a stock of where you are in a very sober way, and then take a look at the resilience and the resourcefulness that you already have of the knowing steps that you want to take. And this can be something that you can work with, for months, years down the line. You can even start checking them off as you go through them and start working on these things. And the second thing that I've written here is to take time to feel grief and reflect on it. It is important to allow the feeling of grief that space and time to crack open our hearts. Open yourself to feeling the cultural wounds of men collectively, such as being conditioned to be emotionally suppressed and cut off from our true empowerment. So I really invite you today, at some point, maybe tonight, to take some time alone with yourself, even just 5 minutes. And I want you to start to stop, to look into this idea of grief. Where is there hidden grief inside of your being? Maybe think about all the things that we've talked about today. Go into your generational line. And I want you to really hold space for that grief. For me, I'm someone who loves listening to really poignant music when I do grief work, because it helps my emotions to start to flow. And really give yourself time and space to cry. Tears are how the soul really lets go and detoxifies its burdens. And we really need to let ourselves fall apart. We don't have to be afraid of that. This is something that I think a lot of men have been poorly modeled to do, which is like hold themselves together, because if they get emotional, they're just going to fall to pieces and be useless. Well, I would say from my experience, when I allow myself time to grieve or fall apart, there's this beautiful lightening of the load inside of this sadness and this grief that's held in the lungs particularly. And you find this beautiful resiliency, and all of a sudden there's this space as all these things leave for this wisdom to just flower forth, insights. And feelings are beautiful. They give you a sort of beautiful sense. Your heart expands. So I invite you to take time today to be with your grief if you can. So stay with me right to the end, just a few more minutes, because I'm going to just lead a quick embodiment practice to close. But just to let you know, tomorrow we will be meeting at the same time, same bad channel. We'll be looking at Realm 2, which is the Wild Man. And Michael says, do I have any more extensive written resources on these topics? Yes. And I also wanted to say that I have written a beautiful ebook for you called Healing Masculinity. And I will be happy to send it out to anyone who's interested. Just write down bonus item in the comments, and I will be sending that out. I'll probably actually post in the group as well at some point. But this is a beautiful written resource. If you want it, just type in bonus item in the comments and I'll send it to you by the week's end. Embodiment thing to close, I encourage you just to bring your hands together in a gesture of union. When we bring the hands together, we bring ourselves into this beautiful sense of peacefulness. And I'm glad people are writing bonus items. That's awesome. And I should say, please invite other men into this. If you have other brothers, if you really enjoyed today, it's not too late. There's just an invite option in the group at the top of the group. Invite other men. This will be shared as a replay, so it'll be posted so you can see. So let's just take a moment, bring our hands together, close your eyes and just come into your heart space and just acknowledge yourself for being in this group, feeling all the beautiful brothers that are with you in this moment, feeling that sacred solidarity. I really acknowledge you for being here with me today and for the days to come, and just stepping up to really chew on these things together and to really galvanize a sense of brotherhood. It's so important for us men to do this work together, and I really honor and feel blessed to be with you all here today. So just breathing in that sense of the divine masculine into your being, letting it load into your heart and just anoint you with all the virtues that you have, no matter your imperfections and your wounds, bringing them into the space as well, honoring it all that you are. Thank you, brothers, for being here today. It's been so glorious to be with you. Thank you, kings, as Jaya says. That's great. So as I like to end things, I like to use this beautiful farewell from the Knights of Templar, those beautiful sacred warriors of ancient Europe, to be glorious. So I look forward to seeing you tomorrow, brothers. Thanks for being here with me today, and I'll see you in Realm 2. Take care. Many blessings.